Springfield, Massachusetts, 2022, a chilly fall day with clear blue skies and yellow leaves covering the streets. Springfield is a peaceful city where people rush to work every morning, but still take time to weekend family gatherings. For me, this place is not only where I live, but also where I have built my family with Aurora. I am Silas Everett, a 35-year-old technology engineer who used to believe that marriage is sacrosanct, a safe haven in a turbulent world. Aurora, my wife, is a beautiful woman with warm brown eyes, but lately they have often seemed distant, as if she were trying to hide something. She is 32 years old, a devoted housewife who has devoted her youth to caring for the family and raising our daughter, Sophie. Aurora is no longer the radiant girl I fell in love with 10 years ago. She often sits by the window for hours, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of coffee, her eyes lost in space. I have asked her what she's thinking, but the answer is always a slight shake of the head and a faint smile. We had some good times. I still remember Sunday mornings baking pancakes together, Sophie running around the house laughing. But those are just memories now. Recently, Aurora said she needed to see a therapist to find balance in her life. As a loving husband, I fully supported her decision. I thought this was just a difficult phase, and like any other challenge, we would overcome it together. The therapist she chose was Harrison Elias, a well-known psychologist in the area. He was 60, elegant, with neatly trimmed silver hair and a deep, persuasive voice. Aurora said the sessions helped her relax and understand herself. I didn't doubt it. Still, I began to notice a change in Aurora. She came to Harrison's office regularly, sometimes spending hours there. At home in the evenings, Aurora seemed like a different person. She didn't talk to me much anymore, and her eyes seemed to hold a secret. I tried to compensate by being more attentive, but that only made things worse. Aurora seemed distant whenever I tried to get ever close. I remember one night when I suggested we go out for dinner like we used to. Aurora looked at me, smiled, but then said she was busy preparing for a meeting with Dr. Elias the next day. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there watching her walk into the bedroom with a feeling of emptiness. My married life gradually became a series of dull and cold days. To fill the void, I spent more time at the office, focusing on my technology projects. But even work could not distract me from the feeling that something was wrong. Late at night when I returned home, the kitchen was cold and the living room was suffocatingly silent. Aurora was often asleep or pretending to be asleep when I entered the room. Once, in a rare moment when we were together, I asked, "Are you okay, Aurora?" She looked at me, her eyes shining with fatigue. "I'm fine," she replied briefly, then returned her attention to the book she wasn't really reading. Her response made me feel like a stranger in my own home. That feeling of unease grew, but I kept telling myself that everything would be fine. Maybe she just needed more time to get over her mental crisis. But that all changed one Saturday afternoon, when I stumbled upon something that shattered all my faith. Aurora had said she was going to see Dr. Elias as usual, but her phone, which she had left on the kitchen table, lit up with a text message. I'm not a nosy person, but the message contained only one word: "See you." The sender's name was an unfamiliar code, but my instincts told me that something was wrong. I began to question. There was something going on that I didn't know. Was Aurora, the woman I had trusted for 10 years, hiding a secret? Was Harrison Elias, the caring doctor she always talked about, really just a counselor? These questions began to haunt me, and I knew I couldn't ignore them any longer. As I stood at the threshold of doubt, I had no idea that what I was about to discover would change my life forever. My journey to discovering the truth began that day. That evening, as Aurora headed out the door with the excuse of an extended counseling session, I couldn't help but think about the strange text message I'd seen. The phone was still on the kitchen table, a symbol of my curiosity and concern. But I didn't touch it. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who invades his wife's privacy. Instead, I tried to convince myself that this was just a misunderstanding. But my suspicions grew by the hour. Something was wrong, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. The next day, I spent the morning thinking. Sitting in my office, I couldn't concentrate on any work. I felt pulled into a vortex of anxiety, but I didn't know what to do to get out. Then I remembered a small surveillance device I'd bought for a technology project at work. A mini camera that could be hidden in the corner of a room without anyone noticing. My mind was in a fierce battle with myself. Installing cameras in the house was a risky move. But in the end, curiosity and fear of being deceived won out. I decided to hide a small camera in the living room and another in the kitchen. I told myself that my purpose was to protect my family, to make sure Aurora was not in danger. But deep down, I knew I was searching for answers to questions she would never answer. 2 days later, on Tuesday evening, I decided to check the feed from the camera in the living room. Aurora had just left the house, and I sat at my laptop with a pounding heart. I didn't expect to find anything unusual. In fact, I secretly hoped I wouldn't. But what happened next changed everything. The image that appeared on the screen was Aurora sitting on the sofa, laughing with a man. It was Dr. Harrison Elias. I had no idea why he was in my house. Aurora had said she always saw him in the consulting room. But what shocked me more was the way they were talking to each other. Aurora was smiling, her eyes shining, as if she were in a completely different world. Harrison leaned toward her, placing his hand on hers in an overly intimate gesture. I paused for a moment, trying to convince myself that this was just an innocent moment. Maybe he was just comforting her. That's what a psychiatrist does, right? But a few seconds later, what I saw made my world fall apart. Harrison Elias leaned down, and Aurora didn't pull away. They kissed, not a light kiss, but a deep, passionate kiss. I felt my heart being squeezed. Shock and pain flooded me. The room seemed to darken, and all the sounds around me disappeared. I was left with only one feeling: betrayal. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted completely, had betrayed me. I stood up, taking a breath to calm myself. Part of me wanted to call Aurora right away and demand an explanation, but I knew that would only make things worse. I needed time to think, to understand what was happening. Instead, I played the video again, this time paying attention to every detail. I noticed how Harrison kept his eyes fixed on Aurora, as if he were deliberately trying to control her. Aurora, on the other hand, seemed both shy and fascinated by his presence. It became clearer than ever, this was not just a simple deception, but an unequal power relationship. I wondered how long this had been going on, and why I hadn't noticed it sooner. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in front of the screen, watching the video over and over again, wondering what to do next. Anger and pain washed over me like huge waves. Every time I saw Aurora's face in the video, I felt a mixture of love and resentment. Part of me wanted to forgive, to believe that this was just a momentary mistake. But another part, a larger part, wanted to find out the whole truth, no matter how painful it was. I knew I couldn't face Aurora right now. I needed more evidence, and I needed to understand Harrison Elias. Who was this man? Why did he have such influence over Aurora that she would betray her family? I decided not to say anything to Aurora. Instead, I set out to find out everything I could about Harrison Elias. I needed to know what kind of person he was, and whether he was really the caring doctor everyone thought he was. Deep down, I knew this journey wouldn't be easy, but I had no other choice. The pain and anger were what kept me going. I wanted to not only find the truth, but also protect my family from being completely destroyed. I told myself that no matter what it took, I would not let anyone else take away the happiness I had built over the past 10 years. This was a battle I had to win, not just for me, but for Sophie, our little girl. I couldn't get Aurora and Harrison Elias out of my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, the painful images came back to me. But I knew that if I continued to wallow in my emotions, I would never find the truth. The first thing I needed to do was learn more about Harrison. Who was he? And how did someone who was considered a respected psychiatrist get involved in this? I started by searching online for articles, profiles, and reviews of Harrison Elias. The initial results were unremarkable. He was a well-known psychiatrist with more than 30 years of experience. Many of his patients had left positive reviews, praising him for his caring and intelligent personality. But as I dug deeper, a few things started to pop up. There's an old article from a few years ago that mentions Harrison in a small-time lawsuit. A family had accused him of manipulating a patient, leading to the collapse of their marriage. The case was dismissed for a lack of evidence. The article doesn't go into much detail, but it's like the first piece of a larger puzzle. As I continued my search, I decided to go to Harrison's clinic to find out more. I didn't intend to confront him directly, at least not yet. I just wanted to observe, hoping to find some clue. But as soon as I entered the waiting room, I met Jolene Dakota, a woman in her 40s with a tired appearance but determined eyes. She was waiting for her turn to be consulted. I don't know what compelled me to talk to her. Maybe it was the feeling that she was carrying some pain. After a few pleasantries, Jolene suddenly said, "Are you here to see him? Harrison Elias?" I nodded, a little hesitantly. "Yes, I have some questions to answer." She sighed, her eyes full of meaning. "If I were you, I'd be careful. He's not who people think he is." Jolene's words took me by surprise. I pressed her further, and she began to tell me a story that I couldn't believe. Jolene said that she had been Harrison's patient, and that he had made her believe that her husband, who loved and cared for her, was the root cause of all the problems in her life. Somehow, Harrison had convinced Jolene that divorce was the best solution, even though she had never considered it before. "At first, I thought he was just helping me cope," she said, her voice thick with bitterness. "But over time, I realized he was manipulating me emotionally. After the divorce, I felt empty and lost, and he completely disappeared from my life." Jolene's story made me more alert than ever. I decided to tell her what I'd discovered. She was hesitant at first, but when I showed her the hidden camera footage, she couldn't contain her anger. Jolene said she knew Harrison had a habit of recording counseling sessions, and if I could find those recordings, they could be used as evidence against him. I took action. Thanks to a work connection, I was able to approach an IT technician who used to work at Harrison's clinic. I pretended I needed help with a research project and convinced him to give me access to some of the clinic's old archives. That's how I found the recordings Jolene had mentioned. Listening to the recordings was a haunting experience. Harrison deliberately guided his patients into their most vulnerable states and then manipulated them for his own gain. In one recording, I heard a young woman, perhaps in her 30s, sobbing as she described how her husband frequently worked late. Harrison, rather than offering comfort or sound advice, subtly suggested that she deserves attention from others. The woman's sobs ended as the recording faded, but what shocked me even more was another recording, one in which Aurora's voice appeared. I heard her talking about the frustrations in our marriage, and Harrison responded in a warm but cold voice. "You need to find your own happiness, Aurora. Sometimes, walking away from an unhappy relationship is the best option." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Harrison had not only destroyed my family, but he was a professional, doing this to many others. I shared my findings with Jolene, and we decided to work together to bring the truth to light. That night, sitting in my office, I felt like I had a ticking time bomb in my hands. All this evidence was not only the answer to my question, but also a nightmare for Harrison Elias. But at the same time, I realized that the road ahead would not be easy. I would have to face Aurora, her betrayal, and my own emotional turmoil. I told myself, the truth, no matter how painful, always needs to be revealed. I was ready for what was coming next. That evening, I sat in my office with my laptop in front of me. Questions were racing through my head. How far had Aurora gone with Harrison? Did she realize what she was doing? And how would I confront her? The evidence was overwhelming, not just on video, but also on the recording of her voice. But confronting someone you love is never easy. When Aurora returned home, it was already 9 p.m. She walked in with her usual faint smile and placed her bag on the kitchen counter. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Fine," she replied without looking at me. "Holding a glass of water?" That superficial answer was like hundreds of others I'd heard over the past few months. But this time, I couldn't pretend anymore. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. Aurora turned to look at me, her eyes slightly confused. "What is it, Silas?" I gestured for her to sit at the table, and I sat across from her. I looked at her, trying to stay calm, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst at any moment. "Aurora, don't you think it's time you were honest with me?" I said, my eyes boring into hers. She frowned, her lips moving as if to say something, but no words came out. I decided not to give her a chance to escape. I took out my phone and played the video from the hidden camera. Images of Aurora and Harrison kissing appeared on the screen. I said nothing, just let her deal with what she had done. Aurora immediately sat up, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Silas, what did you do?" she stuttered. "No, The real question is, what did you do? I snapped, anger rising. This isn't a counseling session. What is this, Aurora? I want to hear it from you. Aurora looked at me, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Silas. I'm really sorry. I didn't know it would go this far. I smiled faintly. Go away. You kissed that man in this very house, Aurora. You think I didn't see? She sat down, holding her head in her hands. It didn't start out like this. I felt lonely, Silas. I didn't know what to do with it. Aurora began to speak, her voice breaking with sobs. She said she had felt neglected in her marriage, that I'd been too busy with work to notice her. Harrison, she said, had initially been a listening ear, helping her overcome her loneliness. But gradually the relationship had gone awry. You're always in the office, she said, her voice full of reproach. Do you remember the last time you actually asked me how I felt? I tried, Silas, but I can't do this alone. I felt stabbed. What she said wasn't entirely wrong. I did spend too much time at work, but did that justify what she did? You blame me? I snapped, standing up from my chair. I'm not the one who ruined this family. You chose that man over trying to talk to me. Aurora looked at me, tears still falling, but her eyes starting to show resistance. You don't understand. You're not here to see me face loneliness every day. Harrison, he made me feel valuable. Worth it? I shouted, unable to control my anger. That man is a manipulator, Aurora. He doesn't care about you. He's just using you, like he does so many others. The argument continued to escalate. I could no longer keep my cool, and Aurora no longer tried to defend herself. We both said bitter things, each sentence like a knife cutting deep into the other's heart. In a fit of rage, I swung my arm and threw the wooden chair away. The loud noise made us both silent. Aurora took a step back, her eyes filled with fear. I realized I'd gone too far, but there was no turning back. Silas, she said, her voice soft. I'm sorry. I really am. But we can't go on like this. I don't know how to fix it. I turned away, trying to compose myself. The room was suffocatingly quiet, except for the sound of our heavy breathing. I wanted to scream, to make her take responsibility, but I knew that no matter what we said, everything would be changed forever. After a moment, I turned back to Aurora, trying to keep my voice calm. I need time to think, I said, my voice low and tired. And you should think about what you want from this life, because I can't keep living like this. Aurora didn't reply, just nodded and walked out of the room. I heard the bedroom door close, and once again, I found myself alone in the house I once called home. I sat back at the table, my mind racing. Not only had I lost faith in my beloved wife, but I felt like I had lost myself in the process. But I knew one thing for sure. Harrison Elias would pay. I was tired of just reacting. It was time for me to take control. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could do one thing. Expose the truth and make the traitor face the consequences. My anger slowly turned to determination. I knew that this journey was long, and that I would face greater pain. But I was no longer afraid. This was my time to fight. Not just for myself, but for all the people who had been victims of Harrison Elias. After my confrontation with Aurora, I realized that I could no longer sit idly by and wait for change. Harrison Elias was responsible. His actions had not only destroyed my marriage, but had also pushed many other families into the abyss. That made me determined to bring him to justice. But facing Harrison head-on was too risky. He was a man of good looks, respected in society, and well-connected. I needed a meticulous plan, an inescapable trap. To start, I had to pretend to be a patient. With the help of Jolene Dakota, I created a completely different persona. David Summers, a successful businessman who was in a mental health crisis after losing his wife. With a fake profile and a painful story, I managed to book a consultation with Harrison. The first appointment was in the familiar consulting room where Aurora had spent so many hours. I walked in, trying to hide my disgust. Harrison stood up and shook my hand with a fake smile. He looked like any other psychiatrist, polite, professional, and trustworthy, but I knew the real him. In subsequent sessions, I began to open up about the issues I'd fabricated. Harrison was very good at creating a sense of intimacy, but I also noticed how he was always trying to exploit my weaknesses. He suggested that I needed to find a new way to deal with the pain, and that's when I knew I was getting closer to my goal. I carried a tape recorder hidden in my pocket. Our conversations were recorded, every word he said, every hint he gave. I wanted hard evidence that Harrison was not only exploiting his patients' emotions, but also deliberately manipulating them. During this process, I found a new ally, Melanie Dakota, a nurse who had worked with Harrison. Melanie was Jolene's sister and had witnessed his inappropriate behavior in the consulting room. Melanie was initially hesitant to help, but after listening to the recordings I had collected, she agreed to join the plan. Melanie provided me with some internal documents from the consulting room, including the notes Harrison used to manipulate patients. Not only were they evidence of his ethical violations, but they were also the final piece of my plan. The plan was put into its final stages when Melanie and I decided to set a trap. With her help, I created a situation that Harrison couldn't refuse. I pretended that I was on the verge of collapse and needed a special solution. Harrison, as expected, suggested that I attend a personal therapy session at his office after hours. Melanie had arranged to hide a mini camera in his office to record the entire meeting. I knew this was my last chance to expose the truth. That evening, I walked into the consulting room feeling both nervous and excited. Harrison greeted me with a smug smile, as if he had the situation under control, but this time he had no idea that everything was going according to my plan. During the conversation, Harrison began offering vague advice, implying that I needed to find new joys to overcome my pain. He even suggested that I take advantage of side relationships to feel more balanced. All of these words were recorded, and I knew that they would become irrefutable evidence. As the meeting drew to a close, Melanie, as planned, walked in unexpectedly, under the pretext of checking the books. Her presence confused Harrison, and I took the opportunity to leave without raising suspicion. With all the evidence in hand, I spent the next few days preparing for the final step, exposing Harrison Elias to the public. I contacted a local journalist I knew through work, providing her with all the audio, video, and documents I'd collected. The article appeared on the front page of the Springfield Chronicle just a week later. The headline read, "Prominent Psychiatrist Accused of Manipulating Patients, Destroying Families." The story quickly went viral, drawing public outrage. Harrison's victims began to come forward, telling their stories. Some even filed lawsuits, demanding that he be held accountable. As the news of Harrison spread, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Finally, he had been caught. But at the same time, I felt empty. Revenge didn't bring me the peace I had hoped for. Aurora and I still didn't speak, and our house was now a cold void. Still, I knew I did the right thing. By bringing Harrison to light, I was not only protecting myself, but also protecting others from his manipulation. It was a victory, but also a painful reminder that life sometimes requires us to make the hardest decisions. News of Harrison Elias spread like wildfire. Articles, videos, and accusations flooded online forums. People who once considered him a respected psychiatrist were left shocked and outraged. Many former patients came forward with their own stories, from manipulative behavior to Harrison sabotaging their personal relationships for his own gain. A week after the first article was published, Harrison's practice was closed. Medical organizations quickly stepped in, investigating the allegations and revoking his license. People who had worked with him, including Melanie Dakota, cooperated with the investigation by providing information. Harrison was sued on multiple fronts, facing civil lawsuits from families he had hurt. He tried to deny the allegations, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, videos, and documents I'd collected were the key to his downfall. The last I saw of Harrison on television was him walking out of the courthouse, head down, avoiding the cameras. The man who had once been a beacon of reliability was now a shadow of his former self. Aurora did not escape the consequences of the incident. When her name appeared in documents related to the scandal, her relatives and friends quickly realized her connection to Harrison. Critical glances and gossip became a part of her daily life. She lost her once tight-knit circle of friends. Those who had been close to her kept their distance, as if afraid that being near her would involve them in the scandal. Aurora's family, once a strong support network, no longer stood by her. She was isolated, living in loneliness and regret. One day, when I came to pick up some things, Aurora sat quietly by the window, staring blankly outside. She tried to speak when I walked in. Silas, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything that happened. I didn't answer right away. I looked at her for a long time, trying to find the image of the woman I once loved, but all that remained was a blurry image. I hope you find a way to fix yourself, Aurora, I said, my voice low and tired. We all have to live with the consequences. The only thing that kept me sane during those months was our daughter, Sophie. Even at a young age, she seemed to understand that something big had changed in our family. One evening, as I took Sophie to the park, she looked up at me with wide eyes. Daddy, do you still love me? She asked, her voice soft. Her question made me choke up. Of course, honey. I always have, I replied, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Even though my relationship with Aurora had broken down, I never wanted Sophie to feel deprived of love from either of us. I knew that she needed a strong father, and that was the motivation for me to keep moving forward. Gradually, I began to rebuild my life. I moved to a small apartment not far from the city center, close to work so that I could pick Sophie up and drop her off. Every morning, I would wake up, make coffee, and look out the window, where the sunlight was shining on the tall buildings. I also started attending meetings of a support group for people going through a marriage crisis. There, I met many people with similar stories to mine, people who had lost everything but kept going. We shared, listened, and found comfort in each other's experiences. One of the people I met at the group was Elise Bennett, a young woman who had just gone through a difficult divorce. She had a warm smile and a way of speaking that made others feel at ease. Through our conversations, I gradually felt that I was no longer alone in this journey. A year after the Harrison scandal, I stood on stage at a small conference for tech professionals, sharing a new project I had just completed. Looking out at the room, I felt proud that I had overcome the difficulties to return to my passion. Life is not the same, but I have learned to accept it. The scars from the past are still there, but they don't hurt me anymore. I understand that sometimes loss is necessary to find ourselves. As I stepped off the stage, I saw Sophie running towards me, a huge smile on her face. She hugged me tightly and said, "I'm so proud of you, Dad." Aurora still lives in the old house, trying to rebuild her life in isolation. I no longer feel resentment towards her. Instead, I feel pity. We still keep in touch for Sophie's sake, but other than that, there's only distance between us. As for Harrison, I don't know where he is. The last I heard was that he moved to a small town in another state, living in the cold of society. But to me, he is just a name from the past. I lost a lot, but I also found a lot. I learned to let go of what I can't change and to appreciate what I have. And most of all, I realized that, despite the pain, sometimes life needs to fall apart in order to be rebuilt. Looking back on my journey, I realized that painful experiences not only leave scars, but also valuable lessons. While I never want to go through it again, I know that it changed me in ways I could never have imagined. Aurora and I fell in love early on, but love doesn't automatically protect a relationship from challenges. Marriage requires more than that: understanding, communication, and a constant effort to nurture it. In the last years of our marriage, we both failed to communicate. I was too focused on work, and Aurora was drowning in loneliness. We gradually became strangers in our own home. If we had opened up to each other earlier, would things have been different? Perhaps. But I also understand that not everything can be fixed. Betrayal not only breaks trust, it also shakes your sense of self. I used to ask myself, what did I do wrong? Am I not good enough? But over time, I realized that those questions only led me to a dead end. Aurora made her own choices, and I am responsible for my own mistakes. But betrayal is a deep wound, and the only way to heal it is to face it, rather than run away from it or blame myself. I have learned to forgive, not just Aurora, but myself. I used to think that holding on to a relationship, no matter how painful it was necessary to protect my family. But sometimes, letting go is the only way to save yourself. Letting go is not about giving up. It is about accepting that there are things that are beyond our control. When I decided to leave Aurora and rebuild my life, it was not an easy decision, but it was necessary. It helped me regain my self-worth, understand that I deserve to be happy. One of the most important things I learned was that we all need support during our toughest times. The support group I joined became an integral part of my healing journey. The stories I heard from them, from their similar pains to how they overcame it, helped me realize that I was not alone. The empathy from the people in the group became a source of inspiration for me to move forward. Sometimes, just having someone listen is enough to make you feel comforted. That motivated me to listen and support others the way they did for me. Ultimately, the biggest lesson I learned is that happiness doesn't depend on anyone. When I was young, I thought Aurora was the key to everything I needed in life. But I was wrong. True happiness doesn't lie in finding perfection in others, but in finding satisfaction within yourself. I started taking time to explore the things that made me feel alive: work, time with my daughter, and peaceful mornings with coffee and a book. These little things, not a perfect relationship, are the foundation for long-term happiness. The pain of betrayal did not weaken me. Instead, it helped me to reevaluate life, to understand that sometimes we have to lose in order to find. Life is not always fair, but it is how we respond to adversity that determines who we become. When I see Sophie playing in the park or smiling brightly as she talks about her day at school, I realize that there is still so much to be hopeful about. Things may not be perfect, but I have learned to appreciate every moment, every little good thing. If anyone is reading this and feeling lost, I just want to say, you are not alone. We all have moments when we fall, times when we feel like everything is falling apart. But remember, every new day is a chance to start over, to find the light in the darkness. Life isn't about avoiding storms. It's about learning to dance in the rain. I no longer blame Aurora or Harrison. Instead, I'm grateful for the lessons they taught me. Lessons about self-respect, forgiveness, and what it means to be truly happy. And with all that I've been through, I know that I'll be okay. Life goes on, and I'll move on, stronger than ever.